Welcome to this Infosecurity Magazine interview, where we're going to be covering how to deploy Agentic AI in SaaS environments securely. I'm joined today by Eoghan Casey, Field CTO, and Carl Brundage, Distinguished Technical Architect, both from Salesforce. To give some context to our conversation today, we have seen a wave of data breaches involving SaaS environments recently, and they've caught a lot of CISOs and infosecurity teams off guard. And what's surprising when we talk about this is, according to research by the Cloud Security Alliance, 79% of organizations say they feel confident about their SaaS security programs, showing that today there is somewhat of a false sense of security in this area. To start with you, Eoghan, from your point of view, what are some of the biggest security gaps InfoSec pros have when it comes to their SaaS environments?
Thank you, Beth. I think it starts with the misconception, even among more mature InfoSec professionals, that SaaS data security is fully managed by the provider, where there's actually a responsibility on the customer side to manage the security of the data and the integrations into the environments where we're seeing a lot of these threat actors enter. And so I would give the top three kind of biggest gaps that we are seeing are these insecure integrations where there's a lack of IP restrictions, mutual TLS, so some additional certificate of security that could be added to the integrations. But then even after the threat actor does exploit some of those configuration vulnerabilities, the broad access of data through that account and through that integration not being managed with least privileged access, giving broad access to much too much data in the environment. So that's one big gap that we're trying to help customers across the globe solve. Then there's also a more fundamental gap, which is inadequate data classification and protection of sensitive data. And that's an area that's always a bit tedious, but if you can apply AI and automation to help with data classification, you know where your sensitive data is and you can better protect it. And then insufficient monitoring is really a key, I think, area here where after you put a lot of the necessary protections in place, keeping an eye on what's happening, making sure that you're monitoring the event logs for anomalies is something that's critical, but often there's a gap there between the InfoSec monitoring and the SaaS environments. And what we really, I think, are trying to do here is bridge that gap between the InfoSec and SaaS teams, making sure that they combine their expertise to make the visibility and the configuration vulnerabilities, fill these gaps with collaboration and shared experience.
I completely agree with that list. And since you mentioned AI, I think there's one additional factor, and that's magnification. So we see a lot of AI being added to SaaS. So you're taking the gaps that you talked about, insecure integrations or unclassified data, and you're placing them into an engine that's just continuously running and at machine speed. So AI is taking those existing security debts like over permissioning or poor data hygiene, and it turns them into active liabilities.
Yeah, if we talk specifically about Agentic AI, and a lot of your customers, I'm sure, are looking to deploy AI agents into their SaaS platforms. What are some of the kind of security considerations you've identified amongst your customer base with Salesforce?
I think the biggest risk with AI and Agentic AI, it's not the AI systems itself, it's the data that they're feeding off of. If you haven't gone through those steps of classifying your data or identifying access that's appropriate for the task, you're not deploying just a faster engine with AI, but you're removing the brakes that you need. So if you think about a person, a human user, they might only stumble across a misconfiguration, their sensitive data once in a while and during business hours. But AI, it's always on. It doesn't sleep. And critically, it's not going to question the data. If you have excessive permissions and you've given it access to something, it's not going to hesitate. It's going to access and process that information. So the deployment of Agentic AI, that takes those dormant risks that you had in your SaaS environment and it magnifies it. It makes it to active, high velocity liabilities. And we need to think about controlling these liabilities. We have to stop managing agents just like a faster person. And instead, think about them what they truly are. They're this new and distinct, powerful class of really non-human identities.
I completely concur. The key there is that these vendors of the agentic AI platforms are investing a huge amount in the security of the agents, and this includes Agentforce and building in multiple layers of security. And the success of that the capability, it depends on the proper configuration of data protection that we talked about before.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, non-human identities, it's something that the security community has been talking a lot more about. As you mentioned, these AI deployments are happening, especially within SaaS environments. So what are some of the key considerations for security and SaaS teams in managing these new identities that are kind of really emerging in those environments?
Well, I'd say the fundamentals still apply of identity and access management, and it's particularly for privileged accounts like these non-human identities. But the security mechanisms and decisions are somewhat different, to Carl's point earlier. There's a risk of overloading a single non-human identity with too much privilege or multiple applications. And so in the really the design of these implementations, we need to think about separation of duties across multiple non-human identities to really break up some of the potential risk that can come with the additional scale and speed of agentic AI. And we need to have continuous monitoring of those non-human identities. That's especially important when we're talking about these AI use cases to detect and respond to anomalous activities quickly.
I think it's also a shift in your mindset. Too often we think of this as just another traditional software tool, but instead we need to treat it like that superhuman that's never sleeping. So the idea is take these non-human identities, like Owen mentioned, and bind them to the specific environments where they're being used. And that could be things like IP restrictions or certificates. So if you do end up with credentials being compromised, they're useless because they're only good inside of that specific context that the AI ran in.
So obviously, governance of these non-human identities is really important, but there can be some risks around over-governance. Can you just explain that to me and how businesses should really think about not over-governing non-human identities?
When we say something's overgoverned, Beth, I think that we're talking about it being too rigid and slow. And so I think about, for example, how organizations respond to security breaches today. There are responsibilities at the executive level as well as at the technical level that need to be coordinated quickly. To be effective, this requires a lot of planning and practice, but flexibility also in the decision-making process. So, for example, if there is a breach that has to be responded to, the act of changing permissions in a live production environment comes with risk, but it might actually save the day in stopping the data breach from going forward. And so governance shouldn't stop you from doing the right thing and shouldn't slow you down when you're dealing with these immediate needs. And that includes the non-human identities and the agentic AI that we're talking about at speed and scale. And so I think of having security and governance mechanisms, not just at the organizational level, but also built into the platforms that we're using to run these automations and agentic AI, that can reduce the risk and complexity and increase easier implementation and speed within the platform itself to apply governing principles on the spot. And that's really included in a lot of what we develop around our agentic AI capabilities with safety guardrails, prompt injection detection, and rule enforcement. In addition to catching these things quickly, any problem that your unexpected activity that you have in the environment, having observability and audit capabilities to look after the fact for any toxicity, interactions with agents that you don't want, that audit layer is critical as well. I think of all of this as really reducing the need for a separate governing agent if you've built it in already. And that really helps with what we talk about in terms of the speed and the flexibility of strong governance.
And I think I'd add one more point to that. Sometimes we overgovern by relying on standing privileges. And what I mean by that is we have to have everything set exactly this way. And anytime we want to make a change, we need to look at all aspects of it before we can modify anything. I think in our articles, we talk a lot about those always on admin rights being a major vulnerability. But if we shift to a mindset of just in time permissioning, we don't have to lock down everything with that red tape. We grant the right access for the right task for the time that it's needed, and then revoke it automatically. So instead of thinking about just as identity, we're also governing the time and the task to have the permissions aligned.
And one thing I always like to ask is about not just the security team working on these problems, but how do they work within the wider business? What stakeholders do they need to get involved in this management and governance of non-human identities within the SaaS environment?
Sometimes I think we say identity in SaaS, so the default is say, hey, that's the admin's responsibility. But managing non-human identities, it's not just for one team. It requires the normal triad of different governance. Infosecurity is setting the rules for the road, what you can and can't do. The SaaS team, I mean, they're definitely in the driver's seat. They're the ones that's operating the system and ensuring pieces are put in place. But the executive committee is there too, right? They're paying for the insurance to have the governance in there. And if you miss any of those pieces, you're driving blind, you're driving recklessly, or driving without coverage. What's interesting though, or another piece that comes into play when we think about non-human identities is there can be additional third parties. The third parties that are providing the solutions or providing the agents. And that's a place where we did make sure that we extend trust to them. We demand a high level of security for them that they're aligning to what we're thinking of from a governance perspective.
Yeah, that's key. In addition to the typical stakeholders involved in cybersecurity in an organization, the SaaS team, the InfoSec team, IT executives, and the board, we really need to define responsibilities for the third party and fourth party application developers and hold them accountable.
And then I wanted to talk a little bit about Agentforce for security that obviously you guys are involved in. How is that kind of helping bridge the divide between those InfoSec teams, SaaS teams, and those that need to be involved in some of the security challenges that we've discussed already?
That's a great question, Beth, and one that really I get excited about because I think the key here is focusing on repeatable processes that we typically take InfoSec teams a lot of time. And this is where I've spent most of my career. And I'm kind of amazed at what we can do with these agents. And it's particularly important from the InfoSec perspective because many of the professionals in our field don't have a deep familiarity with the SaaS environments when it comes to investigating a security breach. So the Agentic AI can really help bridge that gap. And the primary use case that we're dealing with right now in that context is incident response. And so using in our context Agentforce to triage certain threat detection events, take simple actions in an incident response playbook, and then escalate to a person when needed and recommending the next best step. So helping inform and bridge the gap of knowledge to the InfoSec person who might have to deal with this, and potentially just giving them a choice of, do you want to freeze this account, for example, click this button, and they don't have to know all of the administrative details of how to do that in the environment. The agent can implement that immediately. And so enabling InfoSec response more efficiently with the AI assistance and automation and allowing them to spend time handling more serious incidents is where I think you've got the huge benefits.
And as we're talking about incident response and recovery, one thing I know your team has been talking about a lot is that there's no traditional rollback in SaaS environments for business continuity and disaster recovery. Teams should really focus on rolling forward for repair, and especially when we have those on-the-go AI-driven applications. Can you explain to me a little bit about what you mean by rolling forward and not rolling back?
Sure, I'd be happy to. In the era of SaaS and AI, there's not an undo button for the whole company. If we think about what the traditional rollbacks would do, you would take a system offline, you would go back to the latest copy of a backup, fix the corruption, but you'd also wipe out anything that was valid in between. And in SaaS, we had to think about rolling forward, right? Being very surgical and precise with fixing what was corrupted while the system is still running. It's the difference between, rewinding a movie and trying to edit a live broadcast. So with that database corruption, when you're restoring from the prior night in the traditional way, you're going to lose all that work. So the valid transactions, there's a lot of systems integration going on where it's not just the SaaS system, it's everything else that connects to. So instead of taking that platform offline, yes, the SaaS vendor has you covered from an infrastructure level. We're really thinking about your data, your configurations, the things that you're responsible for. You're going to need to stay operational. So you're looking for what was corrupted, fixing that while the agent's still running, while your users are still working. And the velocity of those agents, there can be a lot of collateral damage. Like agents move fast. So instead of having a handful of records that are corrupted, you may have thousands of records in minutes that you need to then fix. Again, a traditional rollback where you stop everything, stop the flow of business, that's not going to apply. You need to have the ability to fix only what was broken, keeping your AI, keeping your people working, and maintaining the speed and scale of innovation without letting data risk becoming a bottleneck.
And then how can we ensure that InfoSec and the SaaS teams are kind of collaborating on implementing real-time responses and kind of combining their lessons learned and making sure that they're not being siloed and divided into separate teams and responses?
Well, the first step is to update response plans and procedures to include SaaS and clearly defining who's responsible and accountable for required functions. So that's where we see some of the biggest gaps in preparation. In our articles, we provide a simple responsibility assignment matrix for threat monitoring response for SaaS systems to help with this so that the InfoSec teams know clearly what they're going to need to be doing, and they're actually interacting with the SaaS administration teams to make sure that there are no gaps in coverage and no missing responsibilities. I think, have as a first step just that human and process correction. And as with any plan, practicing helps make people more prepared to work together when an actual problem occurs. And so we say, do the preparation and then do the practice, and that will put you in a better position to be successful when an actual incident occurs.
Yeah, and from my perspective, effective real-time responses, it occurs when the policy that's coming from the InfoSec team that matches up with the SaaS team's platform. And what I mean by that is InfoSec knows what to protect, the PII or the financial data, but the SaaS team, they're the ones that know the how to technically block a bad actor without bringing everyone else down from a system perspective. So you're not just handing off a policy from one team to another. You work together to configure those automated guardrails and ensure that when a threat appears, you block it. Where it fails, if we think about the opposite side, it's when the teams don't work together. They're in silos. InfoSec writes a policy that technically can't be implemented, and the SaaS team configures alerts that don't really go anywhere. Nobody's watching them from the security side of things. And when we think about it, it's working together to have a new perspective on alerting. The InfoSec teams, they may get alert, but they don't understand the contents of the logs coming from the SaaS system. And the SaaS team's not really focused on threats, but rather system uptime. So the teams work together to refine and fill those gaps where InfoSec defines the threat, like data loss or data exfiltration, and the SaaS team is implementing that into specific platforms. Like, hey, you're looking for API spikes or unexpected exports. The next piece is thinking about monitoring versus automated blocking, right? Monitoring is passive. In a data loss scenario, you don't want to know after the fact that you lost data. You want to be active in blocking that from occurring. So again, that starts with InfoSec thinking about data classifications. This is sensitive. This is the information we want to really protect. And the SaaS team configuring the automated policies to block access on export in real time. Again, you're trying to be surgical here, right? You don't want to interfere with business, but tackle those risky actions. And then the last thing is as always, is lessons learned. InfoSec bringing lessons about detection and response and how you protect the business, with the SaaS team bringing lessons about how you keep that system running. So they meet in the middle. They create a unified security posture, thinking about, hey, these are the things that we find in an audit. We have sensitive data or something that's unsecured. That's a lesson learned. You classify the data from the InfoSec side, and then SaaS puts the encryption and automated blocking rules in place. So definitely a team effort.
Yeah, that's some really great advice there from you both on that response and planning for response, really. Just to kind of close and conclude our conversation though today, I'd love you to both get out your crystal balls and maybe look ahead to the next 18, 24 months. Where do you think SaaS platform security is heading? And can you tell us a little bit about what Salesforce's priority in evolving trusted services to handle next generation threats is?
this is extremely top of mind right now. And looking ahead 18 to 24 months, I think the future of platform security is really defined by two dual mandates. And we have to deliver security for AI while simultaneously leveraging AI for security. And to do that, we are prioritizing a strategy of deepening and broadening our trusted services to bridge this gap, this InfoSec SaaS divide, by bridging between, let's say, the broader cybersecurity perspective in the organization, and as Carl rightly pointed out, all that deep knowledge of the SaaS platform that the SaaS administrators have developed over the years. So we look at helping the SaaS administrators understand the cybersecurity side, and also the InfoSec teams having more support in understanding the SaaS security side. We've talked a bit about using the AI for security in the incident response side, and we're working on expanding that beyond just the incident response use case, but in configuration management. But then also building and integrating in security into the platform, as we've discussed, doing that deeper in the platform, so providing more of these on-platform governance capabilities and security capabilities and monitoring capabilities to allow for the integration of these very, I think, strong opportunities using agentic AI under the governance of the overall enterprise security principles that our customers have. So I think it's the combination of those breadth and depth of security and the using of AI for security and the securing of AI. It's a fairly significant undertaking, but we're really working hard on it.
Yeah, definitely the future of the platform's not just building higher walls to get over. It's that deepening of defenses, right? Going more into the data layer to secure agentic AI, and then broadening out the reach where we use AI to fight AI, right? The bad guys could be using AI. We need to have it as the good guys as well too. But beyond just building, more advanced tools in the portfolio, the benefit comes with collaboration between the InfoSec teams and the SaaS teams, because that's going to be the bridge that keeps the platform standing.
Great. Well, thank you both so much for a great conversation and insights into this topic. I think it will be really useful for our audience, especially as I know many of them are likely customers of yours. Salesforce has been working with Infosecurity Magazine on a series of articles as well, which support the discussion we've had today. So we'll link to those in the video description. But for now, thank you everyone for joining us and watching, and we hope to see you all again very soon.